All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So this is a bit of a bonus Sunday, if you will. I was not originally on the docket for today. As of yesterday, I'm on the docket for today. So I want to use this opportunity to talk about the development of a particular musical literary tradition within Soto Shu. Largely that's because there's a free online lecture happening March 28th, which we'll talk about at the end, happening that's related to this. So this is a bit of a setup for that in a certain kind of way. So you may have heard of baikaryu eisanka, which is our hymn singing tradition, right, using handbells. So whether or not you're particularly interested in baika or singing or, hymns, the story of this thing sheds some additional light on the development of Soto Shu as a denomination, particularly its involvement with post-war reconstruction. So I'm going to use Baika as a way to kind of look at the larger story, right? Although we'll talk about the Baika and maybe sing a little bit if we feel so inclined. I have a gentleman's chorus here. So this should be fun. So Baika as a coherent effort is not an ancient part of the Soto Zen tradition. That was a surprise to me when I first learned about it, because some of the melodies sound really ancient, like ancient Japanese, right? So I kind of assumed this was a really old tradition. It's actually not. It was only official in 1952, so that's only 74 years. I went to I think it was the 60th anniversary conference for Baika in Japan, so it hasn't been around that long. But today it's practiced by both clergy and laity, so this is not like liturgy led by clergy. This is really everybody. In my experience, most of the people singing Baika are what we might call Goeka grandmothers, right? They're the ladies of the temple, but not everybody. So there are these groups, temples form groups called Baika-ko, Baika singing groups, right? So in the late 1980s, there were 170,000 members of Baika groups around the world. That's not even just in Japan. There are a few overseas, not many. But of course, since then, numbers are down. Today, it's maybe 100,000, right? And that's not a surprise to us, given what we were talking about last week, Japan's declining birth rate and the mobility of the population and the aging, right? So it's not surprising that this practice, like many other practices, the numbers are down. It's another example, right, of those external forces at work on practice. So various karmic circumstances have influenced the development of Baika practice, things going on within the denomination, things going on within society as a whole, what the practitioners themselves wanted and were trying to do. So Baika falls under the umbrella of Goeka, which is literally something like songs of praise, right? So this is not the only hymn singing tradition in Japanese Buddhism. There's this larger umbrella called Goeka, and Baika falls under that as a particular Soto Zen form. Baika is a relative latecomer to the world of Goeka. Now, Goeka itself isn't that old, but among all of the sects and the groups and the branches that are doing some kind of singing tradition like this, ours is about the newest in 1952. So Shingon sect practiced Goeka beginning in 1921. So again, we're not talking about 1600s, 1500s, or Dogen's time. Jodo or Pure Land, 1945. And Soto Zen comes along with its version in 1952. So there are subsets, sub-schools of singing traditions, Goeka traditions, under Shingon, Jodo, Rinzai, right, smaller branch traditions. We can see that some of these were established before World War II and some came after, right? So we have ones in 1921, 1936, then we've got 1945, and then after that comes Soto Zen in 52. So one reason for Goeka's increasing in visibility after the war was that there were a number of large-scale chanting competitions and big services, and some of these were war-related, war memorial, right? There were a lot of big public events going on that had to do with this chanting. So prayers for world peace, commemoration of a major hall that was built at Eiheiji, one of the two head temples. These things get broadcast on the radio, right, nationwide. So the visibility for this becomes really very high. There was also a national poetry competition to commemorate Shakyamuni's enlightenment. It had 3,000 participants, right? So these are big, big major events. All of these things attract public attention. So we get this resurgence of interest in Goeka. So of course all of this is happening as the country continues to recover from the war, all the kind of post-war chaos, upheaval that goes with that. Big social changes happening. Liberalization of speech, right? During the war, we have to be careful what we say. Now the war is over. A little bit, we can say what we want. Increased participation of women. Women's roles start to change. Just in all areas, there's a resumption of cultural activity, creative activity, things that couldn't be carried on when our attention and our resources and our energy was going to the war effort. So suddenly, right, we have an opportunity. Things are shifting in a number of ways. So Buddhist music is not left out of this flourishing. Something called the Japan Religious Music Association is founded in 1948, so this is shortly after the war, right? The purpose of this thing is to promote Buddhist music, so it's publishing songs, it's holding concerts, again, raising visibility for these things, but that is just the latest in a longer history of using music to spread Buddhism, to spread the Dharma. It goes back to the Meiji era at the end of the 1800s, right? So this is not a new thing. Within the Ministry of Education, there was a Buddhist Music Association. So promoting Buddhist music as a way to promote the Buddhist faith was national policy, right? And we would think that those are strange bedfellows, right? But that was actually kind of a national effort, a national policy. So there's an interesting intersection of spreading Japan's sort of traditional faith, and we can argue whether, because Buddhism did not originate in Japan, but the traditional faith. We're spreading this Buddhist faith using Western musical forms. Why would we do that? Well, it's a counter to this influx of Christian hymns, right? There's some concern about sort of preserving cultural heritage. So we have this influx of Western forms, Western music, Christian hymns. So some of these Buddhist music begins to take on some characteristics to try to counter some of that. So during World War II, of course, all of this is suspended. This is not the time to be spreading Buddhism through music. There's too much else going on. After the war, people turned back to Buddhism for some help in recovery, just recovering some equanimity, right? So there's increased interest in Buddhist music because people in some ways are returning to Buddhism itself. So various sects are holding ceremonies and concerts as a part of this thing. In 1946, Sotoshu's Social Affairs Department, yes, it has a Social Affairs Department, releases a peace song. It develops a peace song and releases this as part of its sort of public education effort. So music and lyrics are written by famous people. Now, these were not names I know, but people of the time. These would be famous names, right? People writing the music, writing the lyrics. There's a children's dance associated with this thing, which was choreographed by somebody who was well known. So again, raising visibility, celebrity input. I'm interested in this because celebrities were involved with it, right? Sojiji hosts a performance for the first Obon festival that happens after the war. A lot of celebrities, a lot of broadcasters, a lot of general public. This was a big deal. This song catches on. And it spreads widely. It's been broadcast, but it starts to spread widely, right? And then as a result of this, or as a part of this, these peace dance festivals start springing up all around, all over the country in the following years. So this song helps to sort of drive that resurgence. Sotoshu released another piece in 1949 and the lyrics were by the same person who wrote the Shushogi. So you remember last week I mentioned the Shushogi, which was a text really developed to aim at lay people. So it has sort of key themes of Dogen's teachings, 4 key themes in that text, really aimed for people who were not training as clergy and doing intensive practice in the Sanmon Soto. So the person who wrote the Shushogi wrote the lyrics for this song. So today there is a Baika song, Baika version of the Shushogi. It is not this one, it's a different one, right? But I remember when I was in Milwaukee, when I was running the Milwaukee Center for one of the Dharma talks, I sang the song and talked about the 4 themes because it was a good way to introduce the themes, right? So I made use of it too. So we can see that Baika and Shushogi are connected as ways to reach out to people, right? To provide some approachable ways to practice, some easier to understand themes, and some ways to sort of hear the Dharma and engage with the Dharma in a really approachable way. So singing is fun, right? You sing with your friends, that's an enjoyable thing to do. It's not difficult. You're not doing a really sort of intensive technical Dharma study. Everyone can participate, and they do. You don't have to have a wonderful operatic voice. Just like with all of our chanting, this is not about creating a perfect musical performance. This is about sincerity. This is about an offering, right? So everybody gets to participate, and when you do that, you're surrounded by Dharma words. They're coming out of your mouth, going in your eyes and coming out of your mouth, and you're hearing what other people are doing. You're doing this together. And there is some feeling that if you're doing this as part of a ceremony or part of a concert or part of an activity, other people are hearing you, right? So you are giving shape to the Dharma and putting it out into the world. So on multiple levels, when you engage with this, you're sort of immersing yourself in Dharma, right? You're also building relationships with the other practitioners and with the temple itself. So it was a good way to create some communal activity as a part of the temple and life of the temple with all those relationships there. So all of that sits within Sotoshu's larger initiatives related to missionary work, if you will, religious education. So on New Year's Day 1946, you may know, the emperor issued the imperial rescript concerning the construction of a new Japan. What a title, right? This is a famous document, so you might know something about it. This document is important because it declares, for the first time, the emperor is a human being, right? Up to that point, emperor is considered a divine being, right? A direct descendant of the founding sort of gods of Japan. So this is a huge, massive shift in the way the imperial family, the imperial court is seen, right? This is a whole big shift in people's relationship with rulers. So in the rescript, the emperor says, "We must abandon the old ways, listen to the will of the people, and work together as a government and the people to fully embrace pacifism, cultivate a rich culture, and thereby improve the lives of the people and build a new Japan." So this building a new Japan becomes really important, right? The national effort now is to reverse these wartime policies. You have to put things in place. You're a country at war, right? Now the effort is to kind of scale that back. We see the same thing happening in Buddhism. So building a new Japan becomes a project kind of at all levels, and Buddhism is not separate from that. Buddhism is involved with this too. So there are myriad articles and discussions about how should Buddhism approach building a new Japan. What is the relationship, right, between Buddhism and this whole national post-war build a new Japan effort? So every Buddhist sect aligned its educational policies with this overarching theme. And we can see the objective now for Sotoshu publishing peace songs, right, and spreading those around, for instance, part of this larger effort. So today there are those who would say, well, Buddhism and Soto Zen were doing all that stuff just to get in good with the government, right? It was kind of performative, it was kind of virtue signaling, right? Other people would say, you know, these sects, including Sotoshu, are simply trying to do their bit and participate cooperatively in this national effort for post-war rebuilding. I'm going to say you can decide what you think. Read around, do some thinking, you decide what you think was going on there. I don't think there was only one theme. But under this broader Buddhist umbrella, Sotoshu develops its own particular initiative. It does a social education campaign called Construction of a Japan of the True Dharma. Right? So this is a policy announced in, guess what, 1952. Construction of a Japan of True Dharma. So what the chief administrator says about this is, construction of a Japan of true Dharma means the establishment of an ideal society based on the Buddhist teachings that have been directly and authentically inherited from the founder Shakyamuni Buddha. That is the Soto Zen doctrine and the manifestation of a land of true Dharma on this earth. In other words, it is the realization of an ideal society based on the teachings of the Soto Zen sect. Isn't that interesting? What an intersection. We kind of think, well, you know, we're doing Zen and it's like this, and then there's the rest of the world. And here's a very intentional, right, very active engagement, involvement in building a new Japan. So there were 3 slogans that went with this campaign: a bright Japan, correct faith, and harmonious living. So construction of a Japan of true Dharma was centralized as an effort within Sotoshu for quite some time, because, you know, that was a big war. There was a lot of rebuilding, a lot of reconstruction that had to happen. So this becomes a really central effort. And I think it's no coincidence that the Baika vows, yes, there are Baika vows, the Baika vows reflect those 3 slogans. And again, we start to see how the dots get connected. Because the campaign and the organization of Baika practice both begin in 1952. These things are not disconnected. So the Baika vows are, we will live according to proper teachings through baikaryu eisanka. We will live in harmony with others through baikaryu eisanka. We will create a cheerful world around us through baikaryu eisanka. So sometimes we chant those vows maybe before a Baika practice or at a conference or something, remind ourselves what we're doing. So the first issue of Baika magazine, May 1960. So now this thing is the going concern. Baika magazine. First issue says, all concerned, so all the people practicing Baika, should practice the Baika chanting method with consistency between words and actions. Practice the ancestral way for the sake of the ancestral way. Help all people attain correct faith, enter into harmonious living, dedicate themselves to building a bright society, and fulfill their true roles as masters in the construction of a true Dharma Japan, right? This is really seen as a very direct effort at rebuilding, right? At creating an ideal society based on Soto Zen teachings. So you can be in a Baika group and have a good time, but the underlying message is you are actively participating in a new society, which is really interesting. So we can really see the relationship here, right? How Baika practice was aimed at helping build this healthy society based on Soto Zen teachings. Practitioners were encouraged to make themselves and their families and the world better. So this is very much not an individual endeavor, right? So just like the rest of our practice, we come to practice and we think, well, I'm doing this for me. I'm going to reduce my stress, or I'm going to, open my mind or something. And then we very quickly realize we are not doing this alone in any way. And so Baika practice is not separate from that. So why call this thing Baika? Baika means plum blossom. What the heck is the relationship between singing and a plum blossom? And you may know. You might recall that Dogen wrote a Shobo Genzo fast called Baika. Todo-san did a Genzo-e on it. So we may know something about this Baika. The word Baika also appears in Keizan's Denkoroku. So it reflects both founders. Clearly, when they were naming this thing, and they looked around for what are we going to call this thing, and they looked at the Shobo Genzo, and they looked at lots of things. But Baika appears in the teachings of both founders, and of course we know Ichibutsu Ryoso, one Buddha, two founders, is really important for establishing Sotoshu as a sect. So a teacher at Eiheiji wrote in 1947, the plum blossom is added to the orchid, chrysanthemum, and bamboo to form the four gentlemen. The plum blossom is diverse in variety, yet it maintains its beauty and in its ability to grow in mountainous areas and emit a pure fragrance after and during the harsh cold. It should truly be called the foremost of the four gentlemen. Those who study Zen together should consider this plum blossom in the snow as a good friend in their studies. So the four gentlemen are considered the best subjects for painting, right? So we've got plum blossom, chrysanthemum, orchid, bamboo. So here the plum blossom is listed first, and the point usually made about the plum blossom is that it represents endurance, perseverance, right? It blooms very, very early in the year. Toshoji, the plum blossoms were the first things that came out even before the snow was gone. So in the midst of cold, somehow this lovely plum blossom is blooming, it's emitting its fragrance, it's enduring the harsh winter, right? Cold has passed. So just like the plum blossom, and also the point is made like our ancestors who undertook some challenging practices, we should learn from that spirit. The point of this thing is we should learn from that spirit of perseverance, diligence, endurance. So put that into the context of a society recovering from pretty devastating post-war chaos conditions. We can understand why Baika was a comforting practice to the people who were engaged with it, the individuals, and also something that was going to have a positive, meaningful impact in the world, right? So imagine, it makes sense, that symbol makes sense, right? In a society that's rebuilding. So hang on, prosperity is coming was kind of the message, right, for years while Reconstruction was happening. So Soto Zen is positioning itself as a symbol of this transition from hardship, post-war difficulty, chaos, upheaval, to a blossoming new society. No, I think, coincidence, the blossoming new society. And the Baika was one way to do that. So this is a very direct engagement. So things really come together for Baika as an organized practice in the late 1940s. Sotoshu looks ahead to Dogen's 700th anniversary in 1952. So here again, this pivotal year of 1952. So Niwa Butsuan was the head of Eiheiji from 1945 to 1948. He's already thinking about the anniversary, which is 7 years away. And he looked at the plan they had and he thought, this is really pretty outdated. This is not interesting. There is nothing new here. We should come up with something more interesting, more creative, right? He says, this is all just formalities. Let's do something else. So Sotoshu did not have its own Goeika form, or its own sort of Goeika branch, and he wanted to create a song and a biography for Dogen for this anniversary. So he's still advocating for this even after he steps back as the head of Eiheiji, all the way up to 1950. He's still saying, we need a Dogen song and a Dogen bio. And so ultimately, I'm cutting the story short, he worked really hard, engaged a lot of people. Ultimately, Baika comes about, and we do have several songs of praise for Dogen, also for Keizan, also for Eiheiji and Sojiji. If you look at the canon today, we're singing Dogen's words, or we're singing about Dogen quite a bit of the time. So Butsuan was instrumental in sort of getting people engaged with that, developing the forms, but also bringing people in, right? He would go visit temples where he knew the clergy. He would invite them to hold events or study groups or workshop weekends, right? 2-day lectures and workshops on a monthly basis. So we see these Baika groups starting to come together. Now, interestingly, some of the most important Baika singers and teachers have been the nuns. Now, we heard early on, role of women is starting to change just overall, right? This is happening, Baika singing nuns and teaching nuns, is happening in the midst of a historically lower status for women in Soto Zen, just like everywhere else, right? The percentage of nuns as ordained clergy is very, very small. It was then and still is. So their ability to participate in decision-making, to be appointed as missionaries, to be appointed as heads of temples, pretty limited. So around the time of the war, there was a nuns' movement to improve what they called their miserable situation. Right? They formed an association, and in 1950, the head nun, you might know Kendo Kojima, you might know the name, was appointed to Sotoshu's council. She's a strong advocate for the rights of nuns. And as Baika developed, the end of that sort of thread of the story is 3 nuns are sent to a Shingon temple to study Buddhist hymns. And these 3 nuns had no musical background. They didn't understand the scales, which we'll look at in a minute. So it was a real challenge. I mean, they were blank slates. And off they go to the Shingon temple to study this thing. And they persevered. So they learned, and they learned well. And they started spreading this around. So now, interestingly, nuns had a way to be active in spreading the Dharma, because these were not the people you were going to hear giving the Dharma talks, right, and teaching people. And now they have another way to do this. So in 1952, the first record, long-playing record, right, of Baika is released. It features singing by these 3 nuns, right? 2 of them go on to become really major teachers. So they established training for other nuns. There's a 3-day program that included not only the training in singing the songs and reading the music also, but also lectures on what we might call today priestcraft. How do you preach the Dharma, right? How do you organize your teaching and give a talk? And this is training that was really not emphasized for nuns, not available to them. So this is a huge opportunity for 10, 20 nuns at a time, right? Baika opens that door, which is interesting. So in 1951, Sotoshu started establishing an external association, organization, for writing these hymns, Buddhist hymn writing. Begins by investigating the existing schools, and then it starts working on lyrics for Soto Zen Buddhist hymns and considering a name for the school. And ultimately, this is going to be the framework for the organized Baika effort that we have today. So by the end of the year, it has a set of initial songs, a canon, if you will, with lyrics. And these are about Shakyamuni and Dogen and Keizan, not surprisingly, Ichibutsu Ryoso. Also about Eiheiji, Sojiji, themes of the Shushogi. And the canon has continued to expand since then. That was a very initial, modest group. This is the book today, right? 2 sides. So we have lots and lots of songs today. So most of those songs were written by, many of the songs, not most of them, but many of them, the lyrics were written by the former head teacher in the temple where I trained at Toshoji, right? I didn't know when I got there that was an important Baika place. But this teacher's name is Gessen Akamatsu, Gessen Roshi. We knew about Gessen Roshi. And while I was there, the current head of the place was working on gathering up all of Gessen Roshi's memorabilia, right, all the historic artifacts and documents and all this, and making a big display. He was bringing in display cases, right? He was taking part of the Hatto side of the Hatto. He's going to make a big display because Toshoji was an important place. So visitors, when they come there, can learn something about that history, right? While I was there, he also found I think about 100-year-old Baika tree and had it transplanted. And we had a kanon statue, an Avalokiteshvara, a Baika kanon. So it was, the symbolism on the statue had to do with plum blossoms and whatnot. So Toshoji became an important Baika place. So we had Gessen Roshi, and we had Baika kanon, and we had this huge old plum tree, bloomed white every year. So I knew something about Baika before I got there. I didn't know it was a Baika place. So somehow the Dharma put me in the right place. Right? Because I was interested before I got there. I had a friend who was a Baika teacher before I got there. So wow, what an opportunity. And bless him, the head guy there made sure that when there was a Baika class going, I got there because he knew I was interested. He was really kind to me. So I was thrilled. I showed up at Gessen Roshi's place and had no idea and got to learn about that. So if we look at the initial canon, we can see the emphasis on one Buddha, two founders, on the head temples. The songs about Dogen come from his waka poems, right? So somebody looked at his waka poems and sort of made that into Buddhist music. The one, as I say, about Shushogi came from a poem written by the person who wrote that text. Other things were written by Soto Shu leaders at the time. These are people who taught at Komazawa or were somehow, right, leaders of the sect. So lyrics, not a problem. We got plenty of words. We got plenty of literature. What do we do about the music? Because this is completely new for Soto Shu. It doesn't have a songbook, a music book, right? So what do we do? It reused melodies from other sects that were already doing Goeka, primarily Shingon. They thought the Shingon things were the best fit in style. So Soto Shu also commissions the head of a particular Shingon Goeka branch to write music for its lyrics, train an initial group of teachers. Now we have lyrics and we have music. And we also have the Shingon musical notation. So this doesn't look like a Western music staff. This is a series of lines and symbols, and I'm going to ask somebody to rise up and hand out some handouts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I can keep one. Thank you. Just so you can see what this looks like. If you can read Western music, so I've included a simple song here. If we have time, we can sing together. You can compare the Western music on the back with the symbols on the front. I've sort of given you the key here. Here are the signs, and on the back is how the scale works. I'm not going to go into great detail about that. I can certainly answer questions. I just want you to kind of see what we inherited. We inherited this sort of Shingon musical notation system, right? Oh, I need that. Thank you. That's mine. Because if we sing, I want to tell you what it means. We'll see where we are for time. I'm not sure we have enough. Anyway, you're welcome to take those with you, look them over, get a sense for how that all works, right? So now we have music. We have lyrics. We have music. We have musical notation. Now we need instruments. Right? Now we need the bells. These also come from the Shingon tradition, largely. We treat these things the way we treat our oryoki sets, the way we treat our sutra books, our robes, right? I'm just going to move this. So, I am guessing that you cannot see this, and I'm just going to say, I'll leave these around, and if you want to see them and look at them, you are welcome to do that. We have this sort of bell, hand bell, right? And we have this one that we strike with a striker. And the sutra book here. So we have a bell in each hand, right? That's how that goes. So we inherit these things. We didn't make this up. We inherited it largely from Shingon. Originally, there were meanings attached to some of these things. It's not entirely clear to me because this is the whole Shingon piece sort of predates what we were doing with it with Soto Zen. But there's a thing there about, for instance, bodhisattvas using a rope and sort of pulling beings onto the path with a rope and then binding them. There's knots here, right? Then binding them so they can't backslide. There's a lot of Vajra-looking stuff going on here. I'm not exactly sure. This is a symbol of Buddha. Yeah, so there's a lot of symbolic stuff. And this Baika, here's the plum blossom, right? So there's a lot of sort of symbolic things happening here. But we've also inherited. So if you look at other people doing Goeka, it looks, their bells will look similar. Not identical, but their bells will look similar. So overall, all of this sort of represents Buddha's compassion. Saving beings, right? We're going to use all of these things to help Buddha save beings. So these things are sort of relics of Buddha in the way that our ryoki or our robes, right, are relics of Buddha. So we carry these things very carefully. All of this, the way we handle this thing, the posture, there's a way to do everything. There's a lot of forms related to this. All of that is part of the larger element of deportment that goes with Baika singing. Deportment is huge. So we don't just sit down and open our mouths, right? Just like we take the posture for Zazen, we practice very carefully with that. We're very intentional about that, the forms. There's a lot of forms for Baika. So there's an early Baika manual in 1954 that says, the baikaryu school adheres to the doctrines of the Soto Zen sect, relies on the true dharma, and aims to praise the virtues of the Buddhas and patriarchs and to promote the true dharma through the singing of hymns. Therefore, when singing, one must adhere to the doctrine that dignified deportment is the Buddha Dharma and etiquette is the principle of our school, right? Igisoku buppo saho kore shu shi. We've heard that before. That's a central tenet, right, in Soto Zen. Dignified deportment is the Buddha Dharma and etiquette is the principle of our school. So here again, right, this is another manifestation. This is another way that takes physical form in this tradition. So that every action and gesture becomes a physical act of preaching, every word or phrase becomes a verbal act of preaching, and the expression of the pure mind before the mouth is even opened becomes a silent mental act of preaching. So this is very much about putting the Dharma out there, right? Here, what are we talking about? Body, speech, and mind. The three things we use to create karma. In the Shingon tradition, those are the three mysteries. And again, we're inheriting something from Shingon, right? So we inherit this reference to body, speech, and mind from the Shingon, but it means something maybe a little different to us, right? So the physical act of preaching, every action and gesture becomes a physical act of preaching. Every word or phrase becomes a verbal act of preaching. The expression of the pure mind before the mouth is even opened becomes a silent mental act of preaching. So we are 100% practicing when we're doing this. We're not doing this sort of any old way. Therefore, when you sing the hymns, you become the bodhisattva of wonderful sound, singing on behalf of the Buddha and the patriarchs. Thus, when you recite, you must understand that your form is a manifestation of the revered Buddha on the lotus pedestal, and you must maintain the most reverent attitude. Right? So, the bodhisattva of wonderful sound is Myo-on Bosatsu. This is from chapter 24 of the Lotus Sutra. Right? Myo-on travels to here, to the world of samsara, right, to pay homage to the Buddha and to the sutra, and demonstrates the ability to manifest in 34 different forms, teach the Dharma, right? So this is another form. We become this bodhisattva teaching the Dharma when we're singing these things. In some text, Myo-on Bosatsu is another name for Manjushri. So we're also sharing our wisdom. So this is not just sort of an emotional performance, right? We're also sharing wisdom. So we are singing, I like how this says, we are singing on behalf of the Buddha and the patriarchs. We are putting the Buddha's teaching out there. We are a vehicle, we're a conduit, right, for putting the Buddha's teaching out there and sharing that with beings. Therefore, all sitting, movement, and actions from entering to leaving the hall must conform to the Zen state of both walking and sitting are Zen, and should inspire a feeling of reverence in those who observe. So interesting. As we do this, we should be inspiring people just by what we look like, right? Just by the way we're manifesting our awakening, sitting here, doing this thing, should be inspiring to people, right? And of course, this is a reference to the four postures of Zen: walking, sitting, standing, lying down, right? In other words, we're never not practicing. No matter what this body is doing, there's practice going on here. So there's no time when we're not watching our deportment. When we rehearsed for the Baika test, there are tests you can do to level up. Are you an advanced, regular practitioner? Are you able to teach? Are you able to teach at what level? Who can you teach, right? So there's levels. When we practice for the Baika test, It wasn't just that we had to know how to do this song. It started from the moment we walked into the testing room. How were we carrying that, right? So just like here during Sushin, you noticed, how do we carry our oryoki when we're moving to the table? It's the same kind of thing. How are we treating our implements? How are we walking into the room? How are we sitting down? How are we opening these things? When we're finished, there's a way you close them. How do you close them? How do you leave the room? Even that was part of the test. We had to be thoughtful about even that. So I think that's interesting. So we can see that Baika sits at this intersection of our own practice to deepen our insight and understanding and what's going on for me as an individual practitioner, and the outward manifestation of awakening, understanding, dharma, so that we are an inspiration to others. Put that in the context of post-war reconstruction. And wouldn't it be helpful to know? There are inspiring groups of people. Normal, everyday people, not super people. Normal, everyday temple parishioners getting together to sing these things, inspiring each other, inspiring their communities. You can imagine why this felt important, right? Why this felt effective. So even if we don't take up singing as a practice, I think there's plenty we can apply here to the way we sit zazen, the way we move through the world, the way we consider how our practice contributes to a healthy society, what our decisions are based on, how are we holding precepts, right? What kind of values are we enacting in the world? It's interesting to me to see how Sotoshu was creating these opportunities for people to do that in a really chaotic situation. And today, some days it feels like a really chaotic situation. I think we can take a little bit of inspiration from that and not feel that our practice is somehow completely separate from what's happening in the world. I sometimes say to people, don't check your zazen at the door. So whatever that looks like for you being in the world, that could be being a parent, being a good employee, picking up trash in your neighborhood. It doesn't have to be you're out on a picket line. But what are we doing, right? In these challenging times, I think it can be interesting to look back and say, what was Sotoshu's intention about its own role in helping to create a post-war society? How can those things intersect in a useful way? And I just think it was interesting that Sotoshu was willing to ask, how do we realize this ideal society based on teachings of Buddhism, teachings of Soto Zen? What would our society look like if it was based on the teachings of Soto Zen? And how might we do that? So this is one small, fun, cultural gateway, right? Okay, I want to stop there because I want to see if people are interested in any part of this thing, because we can sing together. You might know, before the pandemic, we had a very small Baika here. Myogen was part of that. And the pandemic kind of did away with that. I'm not sure why my hand is up. Probably I put my hand up and it responded to me. Okay. So we did a little bit of this, but I think a lot of that was before you guys were here. So I know singing Baika is not Todo-san's favorite activity. Will not make him sing. He can run away if he'd like to. But it might be helpful for those who've never heard this and don't know how it works to try it together. Folks at home, you're welcome to join us. We can't hear you, but you can hear us. So in the handout you have a song called Sambo Go-asan. This is the first song, typically, that one learns when one engages in Buddhism. This is a song about the three treasures. Sanbo, right? Go-asan is a song. So again, you have the Shingon sort of notation and you have the Western music notation. And if you can't read music at all, it doesn't matter, because the way we learn these things is call and response. And I don't have all of my woodblock and everything here for teaching, but that's okay. I'm going to sing a line and you're going to sing it back to me, and then we're going to do the whole thing. Right? So we'll do that, and then I'll tell you what we're singing and what it means. Right? Okay. First line. Hoko no yami o. Let's do that much. Hoko no yami o. Next one. Terashimasu. Terashimasu. Next one. Itomo toki. Right. Itomo toki. Miho toke no. And then we 2 beats of rest. Right. Miho toke no. Next one. Chikai o nego. All right. Chikai o nego. Mono wa mina. Mono wa mina. Namu kie butsu to. Namu kie butsu to. Tonae yo ya. Tonae yo ya. Lovely, gentlemen. We've got a gentleman's choir going here. All right. Let's see if we can get through it from the beginning. And then I'll tell you what it means. All right. Ko, how's that for a pitch? I tried to pitch it down. Are we okay? San, hai. Hoko no yami o terashimasu. Itomo toki miho toke no. Chikai o nego. Mono wa mina. Namu kie butsu to. Tonae yo ya. Yay, very good. So what are we singing about? What this means is the Buddha illuminates the darkness of our minds, right? All those who aspire to the sacred vow of Buddha should recite, I take refuge in Buddha. You might have recognized, oops, there goes the microphone. You might have recognized that last line, Namu kie butsu, right? If you're sewing robes, Namu kie butsu, Namu kie butsu, Namu kie soho. So there's a verse for each of the 3 treasures, right? So the first one we did was about the Buddha. Then there's about the Dharma and about the Sangha. So that you can, so before we do anything else, are there questions? Because I want to do this one more time. I'll do the bells and then you'll get a sense for how it all comes together. Are we okay for now? We seem to have a musical group today.
Well, it says leader in.
Yes. So if we were doing this in the most formal form, I would be doing an introduction, or somebody would be, and somebody would be doing the first line, and then everybody would join in terashimasu. And we can do that. So if I was to do the introduction is the title of the thing. And again, there are forms about when your hands pick up the bells and all those things. But the introduction would go like, Tonae tate matsuru sambo go wa sanni. Right? We do that. Every song has a thing like that. And then somebody would start in kokoro, and then everybody would join terashimasu. I'm more interested in everybody participating today. We don't have, we could break it down at some point, but I'm more interested today that everybody joins in. Are we okay? Thank you for pointing that out. There are, by the way, lots of potential vocal ornaments here. I did not put them in just so people could hear, clearly hear the melody. I have to move this. Okay. I'm up a little high, but we're going to make that work. All right. So, let's just do the first verse. We get a sense for that. Let me look at the time. Yeah, first verse only, okay? Hoko no yami o terashimasu. And if we were at the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we would bow. So you see there's lots of forms, right? So you get a sense of how these things are coming together. It's a bit like when you learn to drive a stick shift, and you've got bells and voice and 2 hands and all that stuff. Okay, enough from me. What would you like to say or ask about the story of all of this, post-war reconstruction, things about the music, things about the notation, whatever might be on your minds? Let me start with the people here, and then we'll go to people at home. Gentlemen, anyone in the room? Corey and then Jeff.
Yeah. Is Buddhist music a more recent development in general? Is there not
No. There are forms of music associated with Buddhism that go way back, and they have to do with things like temple festivals and court activities, and yeah, so if you want to dig into that, you can. This very particular form is relatively new, but Buddhist music as a tradition goes all the way back. Yeah, there are lots of forms of that. Jeff?
You said the 3 women nuns, I guess.
Yeah.
Who were instrumental in becoming teachers.
Yeah.
Their first generation of teaching was to teach the dharma through Baika. Was that right?
So when those 3 nuns got the training at the Shingon Temple, Sotoshi was first developing this as a form, so they were in the forefront of that. But women didn't have, I think, a lot of opportunities as Dharma teachers. This was an acceptable way to do it, right? It was not so common that a woman was in charge of a temple. In fact, when I was training, I think I only knew one, and she'd inherited her mother's temple, which was really interesting. And these ladies were Baika singers. They were Baika teachers. And I was really looking forward to studying with the mother, and then she died while I was there. She had an aneurysm. Lost opportunity, right? So I think there was a bit of a inheritance going on there, right? But it was a real opportunity for women to share the Dharma. And in my experience, some of my best Baika teachers in Japan were lay women. Sometimes they were temple wives, but not always. Yeah, so it was a real opportunity to begin to share the Dharma in a very different way, a very different form, and sort of with a women's perspective. Because we would go to class, and yes, we would learn the songs, but often whoever was teaching would say, now let's think about what this means. Let's think about the Dharma that we're singing, because we're in a temple doing this singing, and so she would do a little bit of Dharma talk about these things. So it opened up this interesting kind of opportunity, and some voice that people didn't hear.
So what I was wondering about is, or do we think about this as a pivotal time where that led to the proliferation of women priests?
Mm-hmm. So it was possible to ordain, but what you did as a nun was not the same as what your male counterparts were doing. And that was just society at the time, right? That wasn't just within Soto Zen. And I have to say, it was not uncommon when I was training. You know, the men were in the Hoko ringing the bells, and the women were making the tea. And when Westerners go there and they discover these things, they want to, you know, we need to change. I'm thinking, you are not going to change centuries of history in the 6 months that you're there. And like, understand why that's happening. It's not personal to you. You know, you don't have to like it. You don't think it's okay, but you know, you have to be appropriate in this circumstance. So this particular nun that I mentioned, Kendo Kojima, you can read about her. Paula Arai has written about her. You know, her book about Soto Zen nuns, if I remember correctly, has lots in there about Kojima Kendo and just their efforts to raise visibility for nuns, for women, as teachers and just as sort of full participants. So there's lots you can read about that, which is why these stories are interesting, right? Look at all the little threads and fingers, and it can take you some interesting places. Please.
I'm curious more about this gender difference. So was Baika done exclusively by women?
No.
Okay.
No, and it's not today. There are some very good male teachers and people like, you know, so let me just say, before I forget, because I'm coming back to you, this online lecture practice session on the 28th of March, it's a Saturday, I think it's 7 p.m. our time, is in the newsletter, will be in the newsletter, coming out probably today or tomorrow. But I've also made a page, I also started a Baika page on Source. And I held off doing it for a long time because it felt self-serving, because this is something I'm personally interested in, don't want to foist it on people. But given the talk happening on the 28th, I put some additional information out there and some other introductory lectures. So, you know, you kind of look at that. And those lectures are by a very high-level male clergy teacher, right? So when you go to class, teacher could be male or female. I've seen both. If you're teaching just sort of a temple group, they are largely women. But if you're training the training temple, and that happens to be a training temple with an interest in Baika, sometimes they make everybody go. So whether or not you want to go to Baika class, they'll make everybody go. So all the men, all the women, you know, everybody has to go. So I would say both genders are participating. And this is one place where there is some female leadership that you don't see in other endeavors, right? Yeah, I've had some very good female teachers and very, very good male teachers too. And it was interesting to me to see they might be lay people or temple wives, or, you know, not it wasn't necessarily the nuns. It was once in a while the nuns, but not always.
Well, were the women practitioners who were in Baika, were they being directed by men to say that this is where you go? Or was it more of a natural, like, hey, I like this more than what the fellas are doing?
The people, okay, so I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but I'm going to say, in my experience, the women who were singing in the Baika wanted to be there. One of the reasons that this was popular, particularly amongst women originally, was they wanted to sing as a war memorial. They'd lost people in the war, and they wanted a way to, like, do grief and loss, and it was part of that thing. But today, where I used to sing most was funerals. There's some memorial songs and funeral songs, and you know, when Seido Roshi realized I could sing, I was singing at the funerals. And more than one time, I would hear later, he would tell me, some of the women just who had come to the funeral would come to him later and say, can I join that group? That singing meant something to me. Can I do it? Right? There was something. So often I'm singing, I don't know what I'm singing. I'm singing in Japanese and I'm not fluent. I don't know generally. But I'm singing away, and then I hear crying behind me. And I thought, oh, I'm doing something here. I don't even know what I'm saying, but there's something being transmitted here. And then sometimes these ladies will come and say, how do I do that too, right? So they're really there because they felt pulled in by the dharma and the singing and the practice. And again, it's an accessible practice. If I'd been sitting sesshin, I'm not sure people would have come running up and said, can I do that too, right? Maybe they would. I wish they would, right? But there was something about this which kind of was attractive to people. in a way that was very much about immersion in the Dharma and putting the Dharma out there, right? So were they directed by men? I don't think so. I think the women were I think in some ways they were supported by that and those resources were there, but I don't think anybody was pushing them into it.
Well, I mean that in sort of in the T sense, right? Like this is what you do. This is
I see.
If you want to participate, go to Baika.
I never had that feeling because Baika isn't everywhere. It's not like, well, if guests come to the temple, you have to make tea. You don't have to sing Baika, and not every place does. And so I felt fortunate that I had the opportunity. I was in places where it was happening. It's sort of like sewing nyohoe. Not every place sews nyohoe. If you're lucky to be in a place they do that, you get to learn about it. So no, I don't think it's a pigeonhole. Now I see where you're going. I don't think that's what's going on. Yeah. Other questions in the room?
Well, I'm curious. We have a pretty high percentage of females who are ordained in America. How does that compare to Japan?
It doesn't. There's a very, very small percentage of ordained women, relatively, in Japan. Here it's, half and half or something. It's a whole different circumstance.
And a follow-up on that. So in Asia proper, excluding Japan, there's the tradition of maintaining a lot of precepts, much more than we have from the Japanese. And there's more for the females than for the males.
Yep.
Does any of that carry over?
Nope. Well, so not overtly. We all take the same 16 precepts.
Yeah.
You and me and everybody here, we all take the same 16 Mahayana precepts. But there's always going to be cultural influence. I'm going to be in the kitchen making the tea. You're going to be in the hot tub ringing the bell. And, nobody intends any harm by that. It's just that's kind of the way things still work in some ways. And so, again, you can like it or not like it. But I think it's important to kind of understand that context because Westerners sometimes arrive in the training temple very righteous. Not the way to make friends and influence people. First, learn what's going on, First get the lay of the land and kind of see what's happening. And there are many ways where women are exerting sort of quiet power, right? They might not be the ones up on the box, but they're making their presence felt. Yeah. Temple wives, oh my gosh, really important. You couldn't run a temple without these women, right? So there's a lot of, they're not taking care of themselves in a lot of ways, please.
So in modern day, which notation do they use?
When we go to class, we use the Shingon, this notation.
Well,
Yeah.
See, is it this?
It's the one that doesn't look like Western notation.
Well, that's this then.
Yeah. So when we go to class, this is what we learn. It's relatively intuitive. If you kind of look at, if you know the song, and then you look at this notation, you kind of go, okay, kind of see how that works. And that's why I gave you the key, so you could see. There's a round symbol at the beginning of the line for the round bell. There's a triangular symbol at the beginning of the line for this bell. The direction the line is moving from the symbol, has to do with the pitch. How long is the line? Where does it break? What's the angle? So if you know the song, and you look at what's in here, it kind of makes sense. Of course, for this, you have to know hiragana. You have to know. This is not meaning, this is only sound.
Yeah, so continuing with the notation bit, sorry if you said this, when about did they assign these Shingon symbols to any sort of tonal structure?
I'm going to guess when Baika was being organized as a thing, because again, first we had the lyrics, okay, now we have the lyrics, now I have to look at the music, and the notation, and the instruments, and so the official start of Baika was 1952, so it had to be something around, then the early Baika manual comes out at 54, so it's somewhere in mid-50s that we sort of just adopt that thing. This notation system, I think, is bigger than Shingon. I have tried to find some things out about it, and it's difficult when you don't actually read Japanese to try to find some background on this notation system, because I think it's kind of interesting. It is not relative pitch.
Well,
right?
I mean, pitch was my next question.
Because if you look at this, there's pitches assigned to these things. And if you're teaching, you've got a little electronic keyboard and you're hitting the right pitches, right?
Right. Well, when I looked at this, was like, well, I mean, these map up to modern day
Yes,
Western
Yes.
tonal structure.
yes.
I wonder, like, is that just a today thing, or
I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm happy if you and others dig into that and come back and tell me. And at the time, again, when I was going to class, because I wasn't fluent in the language, I would have asked like these really technical, juicy questions. I couldn't do it because I didn't have the language for it, you know. Especially the technical musical language. I can do it in English, but I can't do it in Japanese. So there's lots of just interesting stuff to learn. And again, whether or not you care about Baika as a thing, it just opens up history and questions and society and interesting stuff. Questions in this room?
I do have one more.
Okay, one, and then I think Abby's got a hand up. I will not ignore you, Abby. I will get there.
Okay.
Sawyer,
Just
I gotta quit waving this around. This is Buddha's head.
so when I heard you say this almost kind of like slogan that the Soto school had come up with about an ideal society based on the Soto Zen doctrine or something.
Yeah, so does Zen teachings.
And it's like, part of me is like, wow, that's worthwhile to think about. What would the world look like if
Isn't that an interesting
everyone
question?
was sort of feeling or
Yeah,
engaging in these teachings.
yeah.
But then there's another part of me that's like, whoa, we're gonna say, it feels like I don't know, indoctrinating the world and getting it into our frame of reference, and other ideas are not the way that things should be. So I wonder, it might partially be a translation thing. It might also be a just cultural difference in an American outlook on diversity of religion and such. But I wonder how you see that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I think if we in North America encountered a religious tradition that was saying, we're going to build a new society based on our doctrine, we'd go, oh, no, you're not. Like, what? Right? But I can imagine a time in a country and a society where stuff's been leveled and there's not enough food and everything is tough and you are rebuilding from the ground up. And I can imagine people looking around and saying, rebuilding based on what? Like if we have a blank slate in an ideal world, how would we do this? If we were starting from zero, what system would we use? What structures would we pay attention to? What values would we? You can imagine people sort of thinking like that in a really unusual situation. So I don't know. I mean, were these people really out to sort of ride over the hill and take over? I don't think so. I think this is about what are we putting into the world? What are we contributing to this national effort to rebuild our society? Are we contributing things which are wholesome and healthy and sustainable, and or are we missing an opportunity and putting in things that are based on delusion and three poisons and continuing hostility after a war and conflict? I mean, imagine the shift. You're going from a society that's been in a big war, a lot of damage and destruction and loss of life, and then you're thinking about, okay, what's the alternative to that? Walking Buddha's way. What could that look like? And not necessarily in a way that forces that on people. It just says, what do we make available in this very traumatic time? Which is an interesting thing to think about. Yeah. So I don't think they were trying to unseat the emperor. I think they were trying to put something wholesome into the world. And no doubt trying to survive as an institution in really tough times where people were struggling, people were disillusioned, they didn't have a lot of money. I mean, in some ways that's when you turn to religion. But certainly, as we've seen last time and this time, any institution will do what it thinks it needs to do in order to keep its integrity. So, how self-serving, you can position that as really self-serving or not. I don't know. and no human action is ever probably entirely pure. So,
Well, in the years going prior to World War II, building up the Japanese nationalism, there was a greater emphasis on Shintoism, and Buddhism was diminishing
Yes.
in influence.
yes,
And if that's an opportunity to reclaim
Sure.
the central rule of Buddhism.
sure. Well, and now we have a shift in how we see the emperor, right? And if Shinto was the thing because it supports the emperor having a particular position, and that is shifting. I mean, just everything is up in the air. Imagine being in those circumstances, like everything you know and think and believe in is kind of up in the air. What a scary time. I don't want to forget Abby, who's got her hand up.
Yes. This is a technical question about the music.
Okay.
Since it is notated in Western form, and that seems to follow very closely what I hear being sung, in fact, totally accurately, I'm just wondering, especially since I don't have a voice that can sing anymore, I'm wondering if other instruments, for instance, a recorder, if it's appropriate to explore the music with a different kind of instrument.
Sure, I think why not? There are very traditional 74 years, ways to do this, but you can find recordings. I'm thinking of one or two songs I know in particular, which are entirely instrumental, and they're done by an orchestra. So I think any way that this can serve as a gateway for dharma is not a bad thing. So traditionally, the instruments that go with this are percussion. They're not melodic, right? But I don't think that's a reason to not try something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? I think if you have a recorder or a piano or an Irish tin whistle, go for it. Right? Because you can have the same intention. You can hold your body in a particular way. You can do this thing, so it's not verbal. Okay. So I'm going to say go for it. Have a good time.
I realize it would not be appropriate in a ritual moment, but privately maybe.
Well, I think if I had sangha members, I think if you were physically in my sangha here, and we had a baika, and that was the way you participated, I wouldn't say you shouldn't do that.
Okay.
I would go for inclusion. I don't think there's any benefit to, right, wrong. Now, could you take the Baika test with a recorder? I don't think so. Because there's certain things about the voice they have to evaluate, right? But I think this is about inclusion and participation and sincerity. I think if you're doing it on a kazoo, good for you.
Remember a Scottish bagpipe.
You can do it with a Scottish bagpipe, why not? I've often thought there are some of these songs that I think you could put next to, like I would put Sambo Gawasan next to because the chord progressions kind of match, I once found a really interesting set of recordings on YouTube. There were Gregorian chant going next to, I think it was Tendai chanting. I don't know if it was this, right? It was like, that was really interesting. So you got the monks over here with their Tendai stuff, and you got the Gregorian chants over here, and they're in the same place, I just think there's ways we can explore this. Yeah, please.
And I'd like to say to Abby, just because you don't have a voice doesn't mean you can't sing.
Right. That's absolutely true.
I give you my former teacher, Suiko Reddick.
I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket.
Not at all. That did not stop her from
No.
singing and teaching.
That's right.
I also have an aunt, my Aunt Kathy, Mormon, and a lot of singing, but she needed a lung transplant. She barely had enough energy to walk from the kitchen table to the living room. She would need help. But oh man, she could still sing. She had no breath, but she had a voice. So she gave everything she had. And for me, that was an inspiration. I called her a Mormon bodhisattva. And
Absolutely.
it's also inspiring for me because I'm very self-conscious about singing, so I don't sing as loud. But I'm aware of that, and I know I should give it my all. It's not about what I do,
Yeah.
it's about my intention.
Yeah, that's true. So again, just like the chanting we do during morning liturgy or the world peace ceremony that we're about to do, of course it's about sincerity and intention and deportment and all of those things, right? If you could see some of these little grandmothers, I mean, they can barely hold it to the wavery. And you know, they're like practicing for the Baika test. And I just think, good for them. You can hardly tell what tune they're singing, right? It doesn't matter. I just think good for them. Good for them. Other comments, questions about the story, about the music, about the lecture on the 28th? That information is all on the website. Please find it. Yes?
I'm interested in this pairing of music in reaction to devastation. I mean, I think we can think of some examples of other times. I mean, just in the Christian church, Catholic church,
Yep.
there's usually singing involved at funerals.
Right.
And then one specific example that I've been exposed to in the 1980s and 90s, there was an AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
And that birthed a whole movement of men's choruses. And then that grew into women's choruses, and that grew into trans choruses,
Yeah.
non-binary choruses, queer
Right.
choruses. And like that was such a strong response.
Yeah. Really empowering.
I've been in gay men's choruses for over a decade now. And I sang in the original one, San Francisco.
Cool.
And so, yeah, I was just reminded of that.
Yeah.
That there was this other time when there was a community that
Yeah.
was, was dealing with a lot of loss. And
Absolutely.
needed to find a way to express their grief.
Yeah. And I think, so of course there are many, many ways that we deal with grief and loss in very creative ways, in artwork and in other things. I think there is something about making sound which is physical. And I'm not someone who lives in my body. So one of the things I've really noticed about this practice is really good for me because it puts me in my body. I live here. I'm the person, you're going to go into a room and say, oh, there's a crooked picture on that wall. I'm going to say, you mean there's a wall? I mean, I have no tech, I just live in my head. So there's something really interesting to me about the experience of making sound with my body. Because it feels like something I can physically do. And I'm in no way saying the other forms of art are not important, because they are. But this one is different in that way. So I don't know, I don't dance, but maybe dance is similar. You're moving your body in a certain way. I don't know, I think there's something about giving shape to the dharma with your voice, which is interesting, which is why I've also always been interested in like work and chanting practice and other things. As a practice, I think it can be powerful. I don't know, it just feels like something which is active in the world. So when you're describing everything, I can imagine why people would want to get together in solidarity and make sound.
Yeah, I mean, there are physiological reactions and synchronicity
Absolutely.
that happens.
Absolutely.
So doing it in a community setting is very powerful.
Yeah. Well, when I would go to Baika class, one day I asked the ladies, you sing for a while and then there's always tea and cookies and a little, break. And one of the benefits for people, especially older people, is this connection, right? And I would ask the ladies, so, what do you think about that? You okay with this? This strange Western woman with a Western voice joining you. Oh, we think it's just great. So to sing with these little Japanese ladies where, my voice is here and their voice is here, and I could blow them over, right? I usually have to be careful, right? To sing in a mixed group like that, and then we're all doing the same thing. Even though our bodies are different, our voices are different, there's something about we're all doing the same thing in a unified way, which is really helpful and interesting. And I think I would not have had other opportunities to connect with people in that way. When you're in the training temple, you're with other people who are training, and that's very nice, and there's things about that. But that's not what these ladies were doing, and I got to connect with them in a more personal way because we were all singing Dharma, which was a really interesting experience that I'm glad I got to have. Not everybody does, I'm glad I did. So that's an intersection worth continuing to consider. Yeah. Other things, we probably should move on to the world peace, but if people have questions or comments, I don't want to cut that off. Other things people would like to say or ask today? Okay. This is,
Something we can sing with world peace?
pardon me?
Is there something we can sing with the world peace?
Not something I could teach you quickly enough, but yes. So I will say, if somehow folks are interested in restarting the little Baika group, I am more than happy to do that again if folks want to explore that and get together and sing for things. I've sung for weddings, there's a song for precepts, I've sung for precepts, right? There are ways to include it in the life of the Sangha if we want to do that. I'm just going to plant that seed, but I'm not going to advocate for it. People have to be actually motivated to do it. It's not something I want to drag people into.
We should do it.
It's like a heavy metal version of that?
Well, you can go on YouTube and see the monks doing heavy metal versions of Heart Sutra, all these things. I'm just going to move this to the side before we chant. Okay. If nothing else today, let's move on to our world peace. Thank you for singing today. That was not what you expected, right? Thank you very much.